Okay. So yeah, I'll do the usual like hi everyone thing, and then I'll read the poem, and then we can start talking about the MacLeish. Great. Hi everyone, this is Max. I'm with the European Time Zone Meetup group, and today we're going to be reading Ars Poetica by Archibald MacLeish. Ars Poetica. A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb as old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving as the moon releases twig by twig the night-entangled trees, leaving as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf. For love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea, a poem should not mean, but be. So, yeah, I mean, if Mary were here, I would ask her for her first, her rationale for picking this. But I think I want to start by asking so imagine this is like a ModPo collaborative close reading, and imagine Al is here, and what is the first question Al would pose about this poem? So what would be like the first?
The title?
But like a sure. What does the title mean? Yeah, that's a good guess, Vijaya. But maybe something more specific. What would Al like say? What would he?
There is no this in it.
Right.
I think I would like to say a poem should not mean but be. So
Yes.
how are we going to dig into it like this?
Yes.
That's true.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is there?
Well,
Looking for one more specific.
how is this poem fit into this week? We're doing this week of language poetry, right?
Sure. Well, we're sort of, we're kind of going off the script a little bit. So this isn't like.
So this poem that rhymes and uses similes, how does this fit into language?
Right. So okay. So you're getting us closer there, CJ. So this poem that uses rhyme and simile, and right. Okay. So what is like? I don't know. What I don't know. I don't know how to ask more leading questions without giving away. So what I would guess that Al would ask something like, does this poem do what it says? And I think that so famously in ModPo we sort of don't have many poems that have like rhyme and simile and these very traditional poetic devices. We tend to have poems that don't have those for various reasons. But the rhyming, the form of this poem, is this poem doing what it says? I'm just going to put that question out there.
No, it's too many. It's so wordy.
Okay, so it's too wordy to be a sort of like object that just is.
It doesn't just be. It's got flocks of birds flying all around,
Okay. Maybe more instances of this poem doing or not doing what it says.
Well, the fact that what is it? A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. That it says that twice is doing what it says by the repetition.
It also says a poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. So it's kind of maybe it's kind of ironical.
That's okay. That's a good point, Vijaya. Maybe something for us to consider, like how sincere is this poem, or how sincere can it be? or is what it's proposing somehow like very difficult to attain?
Did I have a thought. Did anyone read Homer's 400 pages about it, what Ars Poetica really is? To him, anyway.
To Homer,
I
no.
only know a summary.
It's not.
No.
Did anybody go back to Horace in 19 BC who produced the first Ars Poetica? Not me, I just found out he did it.
I also did not go back to Horace, who inaugurated the tradition.
And I said Homer, but I meant Horace. It's
Oh, okay.
Oh, fine. I thought
Bert?
perhaps they both had a shot at it.
I have a proposition. I
Yeah.
like this line, a poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. But here he is using words, but on the other hand, he is presenting a flight of birds. So the image, we are in the image of a flight of birds. So we have left the words.
That's okay, yeah.
So I think in that way, he is true to his words. The question I guess I would say is there something besides producing image that is wordless? Is there other ways of being wordless?
Yeah.
The question,
go
the
ahead.
question is what does he mean by wordless?
Well, I think it means it promotes a thought that we hold. That are
Yes.
wordless. Okay.
A poem should be wordless. A word is something with meaning. Is meaning important in a poem? The poet says no. Maybe he refers to sounds. A poem should be full of sounds, like the flight of birds when you hear the birds flying.
Right.
But then he's also saying it should be mute. So he's very contradictory.
But he also says
Thank you
it
so
should be
much.
not true.
Sorry, Lee, can you say that again?
He also says it should be equal to. I'm sorry. It should be equal to not true. So maybe that's kind of what we're getting at. It's saying so many things that it's not.
that line, I couldn't figure out why he had, punctuation there. A poem should be equal to, but not true.
Ah,
I didn't understand that line at all.
Maybe he says it has to be a representation, not an exact similitude, and just like, just a general kind of.
Yeah, it shouldn't present facts.
Yeah, to me, it's a reference to Boolean algebra, where you have the ones and the zeros, true, false, not true.
Or as opposed to prose, because prose can be true, right? You have nonfiction in prose, but like here, he doesn't want the actual reality to be presented, like a mirror reflection, not exactitude. I don't know.
right. So Mark, the point about the colon, sort of this algebraic, almost mathematical function, I think is spot on. And it reminded me of, so for those of us who took the SATs in the US, we may have fond or not so fond memories of the endless syllogisms that you're supposed to learn. A colon B as C colon D, and you're supposed to fill in, it's a way of doing vocabulary. So it's always divided with a colon. The colon is sort of like equals sign, this kind of like, this the sort of the pivot on which the comparison is made. So that's sort of how I had understood the presence of the colon there, the punctuation, because the poem should be equal to colon, not true. I mean, but there's also a ton of ambiguity there, right? Like, right, we can say that the poem should be not true. Wait, well, I don't know. It's actually a little bit hard to piece out when you actually start like to make sense of when you start to spend time with it. I mean, I like what you said, Lee, about it's not presenting facts. So it's not interested in like truth or questions of veracity. But then I don't know if MacLeish would say that a poem is not interested in truth.
Logic, maybe that's the
Yeah.
logic.
Yeah, logic and facts. It's not interested in facts, maybe.
But we might say that poetry often is more true than the prose that's trying to tell the truth.
Sure.
In
So
a
it's like-
metaphorical sort of way.
Right. A poem is not interested in like procedurally and laying out truth or veracity, right? It's not like a poem shouldn't be assembling terms and you know, performing a sort of deduction or something, saying like because A then B, because B then C, therefore A leads to C, or something like that. I think maybe that's sort of the kind of truth that he's calling into question.
What about that line, dumb as old medallions to the thumb? I mean, what does that mean?
That's a good question.
Well,
Familiar,
what?
familiar, like you
Hmm.
rub a coin and
Yeah.
um,
Dumb, yeah. I mean, dumb in that they don't speak, right? I mean, this fits with the muteness. There's muteness.
and
dumb-
there's two sides to a coin or a medallion.
Hmm.
And there's also usually little ridges around the edge that your thumb would go round.
That's true.
And you flip a coin,
Mhm.
Mhm.
heads or tails.
That's true. And a coin has value. Which so it's a rather like evocative object.
Yeah, a coin is history too, right? You
Yeah.
can date the coin.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. It has its own sort of information on it, and
Yeah.
each coin is unique.
So it is not dumb. It is not dumb.
It's this, yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, a coin actually, it does a lot. Like,
Yeah.
they're also, coins are in circulation. It's something that
Yeah.
passes between hands. It's something that
Mhm.
travels very far and nobody really knows how far it does travel. It's impossible to keep track of a coin.
Yeah.
It's-
But so does a poem. The poem has traveled now.
Right.
We are talking from all over the world.
It goes out into the world, it goes into circulation, and nobody
Yeah.
knows how many thumbs will get on
Yeah.
it, you know?
And there's history to it. We date it. We talked about the
Yeah.
date when it was written,
Yeah.
right?
But
And
it's
also-
also a pretty dumb rhyme.
I mean, the rhyme, yeah, so
The couplets, yes.
the rhyming couplets is something that I guess we could also talk about. I mean, is this what I mean, does that serve, how does the rhyming, this form or his observance of form fit with this idea of the poem being this mute coin-like object or something? I mean,
Well,
the rhyme feels different to me. I don't know.
I think it's significant that after 3 couplets that do rhyme, that the moment he said the poem should be wordless, it's the first couplet that doesn't rhyme.
It's true. There's a nice like subtle internal rhyme with word and bird. A poem should be wordless as the flight of bird was. You know, like there's almost it's almost like implied there. It's sort of interesting. It's an interesting like twist on the meter and the rhyme scheme we're getting accustomed to.
It's not a perfect rhyme, but it ends on and we call that a consonance. It is a form of rhyme.
Mm-hmm.
It's certainly not a perfect rhyme.
No. It's a weak rhyme, but it rhymes in a way. Same thing with actually
Force
throughout.
it? Could you force it? A poem should be wordless, like the
Wordless
flight
and
of
birds.
birds. You know, you could force it.
Oh, like as a flight of birds. That's the,
Oh, birds.
Or wordless, like a flight of birds.
Only the yes, I meant.
yeah, I mean, in some ways, he's almost asking you to force that rhyme. There's other instances of this in the other stanzas as well, of playing with these internal rhymes and these weak rhymes. mean, like the last couplet of poem should not mean but be. Mean and be, you know, it's definitely not perfect, but I think it's there.
Well, he says the leaning grasses and 2 lights above the sea. That
Mhm.
rhyme. We have it.
Yeah, for love, the leaning grasses and 2 lights above the sea. A poem should not mean but be. The rhyme scheme is always kind of like drifting in the lines, right? It's showing up in different places.
Well, I
So-
wonder if Bob Dylan would use this as a poem or a song. You know, he said if you can sing it, it's a song. So the leaning grasses and 2 lights above the sea, you know, a poem.
Yeah,
But be.
I can hear it now, Stanley. I think you're right. So
The couplets are important. They structure the poem. And as I said before, sound is important. A poem should be wordless. It refers to sound, not the meaning of the words. I'm still trying to figure out what he means by mute. A poem should be palpable and mute. It's the beginning of the poem. It starts out of nothing. It's a creatio ex nihilo, a creation out of nothing. As God created the world, he starts with sounds and the poem develops. I'm sure that it is important that he starts with that a poem should be mute, and then you have these wordless words and they only represent sounds.
Terry, is this your demonstration of the avocado poem?
The globe fruit.
the globed fruit. No, that's a good point, Mark, of the sort of the creation ex nihilo. I mean the globe, right? The earth. You know, there's this sort of creation myth that's being echoed here at the beginning. The poem comes out of nothing and it's a globe. Fruit is always, you know, a rather evocative or provocative symbol.
Vanna White.
Yeah, Vanna White indeed.
Thanks, Jerry.
What'd you say? Vanna White?
Yeah, Terry is modeling all of the fruits she has in her nearby.
I was just thinking, but isn't that what every poet, every one of us who sits down with a blank page hopes to create something, you know? And so I try to write something every day, and I start with a blank page, and I'm always amazed at what comes out, you know?
I'm remembering, I think Vijaya said irony, and so much of it feels like tongue in cheek to me, like he's jabbing, like exceeding the style that he's using.
So so maybe let's run with that. So he's in some ways not doing what he says, and it's intentional, right? It's not a failure of the poem or the poet. He's not saying a poem should be like this, but I'm not heeding my own advice. In some ways he's saying, you know, a poem ideally should be like this, but I'm not doing that in this poem. I'm exceeding the style, as you put it so well, CJ, or exceeding the sort of the prescriptions or the limits that I've prescribed on what a poem ought to be, to make a point. So what would that point be? If there's irony here, if Archibald MacLeish is saying like I'm saying one thing, but I mean something else, what is it exactly? Why would he not follow his own advice? Or you know, not advice, but why is he not writing? Why is he not writing a poem that does what he says a poem should do?
I think
go ahead, Jenny.
I think should is quite an important, should be is quite important,
Good point.
because should is the kind of word that puts most of us off. If we're told we should do something, that's the last thing we want to do. And to start with that in the first line, if we're looking at this as an ironical poem, then should be is sitting in the right place,
Hmm.
possibly.
Should, so okay, so should is some right. Should is a very conditional. There's it can both be like imperative, like you should do this, you ought to do this, and it can also be conditional, like it can be like should X happen, then Y, right?
But then look at the last line. Poem should not mean, but be.
Back
So
again.
he repeats the should again. Oh, he repeats should quite a few times.
And that's a very imperative should. A poem should not mean but be. There's a very clear prescription, right? A poem ought to do this, not this, right?
The final two lines are the peak of the poem. He has a poem should be all the time. He repeats that. A poem should be palpable. A poem should be motionless. A poem should be equal. And then he also has a poem should be, but he extends the line to a poem should not mean but be. A poem should be.
Right. So he sort of flips this.
Oh, he extends that. He makes it longer.
Yeah.
To give it more importance.
Mhm.
A poem should be, and he inserts not mean but.
I see a lot of the experiment and the language poets in this, the last line. I mean, because they don't care about the meaning, but they just want the poem on the page, whatever their experiments are, right?
That's a really good point, Vijaya. There's a sort of, thanks for bringing it back to the ModPo syllabus.
The modern, yeah.
Right. There's a in the language poets, we might say there's an emphasis on existence or something, right? Like
Yeah.
it's almost like existential move, like the materiality, the words themselves are a priori, and then the meaning follows from that. So we can put different sentences together, and there'll be a sort of meaning that emerges from that encounter. And that's the true, that's the meaning that we're after. That's the meaning that's the most important, not the one we get semantically just from reading something. So it's a good point. So there's almost like a kind of material, I mean, for sure throughout there's this emphasis on the materiality of poetry, this comparison to the globed fruit, to the coin, and so forth. These sort of everyday objects that the poem should, according to him, be like. But I think it still begs the question: why is he not doing what he says a poem should do?
I believe he does.
Maybe he is.
What does he?
I mean, related to what Vijaya said at the end, the poem should not mean but be. Maybe he's using words, but it still is being, and so he's created a being, and end of story. I guess that's all I wanted to say.
No, that's a good point.
It's a meta. That's Al's point of meta, right?
Exactly. Right. We come around to the fact that at the end of the poem we have the poem, and the poem is existing. So that's true. So perhaps he has in fact done this, like but the poem is also meaning at the same time, right, throughout. So it's a little bit like,
and since meaning doesn't really matter, why do we care for the contradictions and paradoxes? There is no meaning.
Well, then that would make it a language poem.
Yeah.
I like two lines we haven't looked at, which is silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. Because you can see physically that that place where the moss has grown, but somebody's been leaning on it and the moss has been worn off. And it doesn't say anything in a literal manner, but it says to you that somebody's been there all the time.
Hmm.
Well, someone's been there, but moss has grown on it as well. And moss
Yeah.
doesn't grow on a rolling stone, you know, or whatever that the line is. So it's
That's the line.
it's ironic. Yeah. So it's old and moss has grown on it, but at some other time it was worn.
It made me
Yep.
think.
Oh, I think it's worn between the moss. I think it's mossy, but there's a place where the moss has been rubbed off by the elbow.
Ooh, sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. So somebody's leaning out of the window, is that?
I think so.
And rubbing it like, so rubbing the stone or rubbing the moss. This is a really interesting.
Stone.
Rubbing the moss off the stone is what I think of, because I can think of times that you do that. You lean on something that hasn't been leant on for years, and whatever's grown on it, you knock off with your elbow.
Mhm.
To me, it seemed the other way around. At first, people were hanging out of the window, make the stone sleeve worn. Then people
And the moss
stopped,
grows on it. Yeah,
and,
it's like
and then people stopped looking out, and it became moss grown, and that made me think about the two of the last couplets: for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, and for love, the leaning grass and two lights above the sea, which are two metaphors that have been used so much that we don't want to use it anymore. Like that people have used it so often, have looked out that window so much that we want to stop looking at it that way.
Can you come back to the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, because that's the couplet which I've least been able to make any sense of.
Oh yeah, when we I looked it up this morning. When I was looking for "silent as the leaf-worn stone," and it's when you Google it, you only get interpretations of this poem. And there was one interpretation that said, for all the history of grief, that's only you can use an empty doorway or a maple leaf as sufficient metaphor for the whole history of grief, so you don't need any other poems for that. So that was what I had in my head when I made this comment.
But the expression history is of interest. It isn't the past, it's history. It's what we make of the past, our interpretation of the past. We interpret grief.
We have experienced it throughout history. Everybody has had some grief at one point.
Yes, but the importance is that it is the history, not the past, not what has happened before, but what we make of the past.
Memory.
Not the instances, but the history. Yeah.
Right. Memory is more past, right? It's not really history, or it can be history.
When I Googled Sir Archibald, he said that he viewed World War I as ending of the old world, and a new world that he sensed rather than understood. And so this poem was written in 1926 after that, and he was really trying to understand what was going on in the world. But he did view the end of World War I as a turning point.
And I suppose there's some, you know, if this is in fact written in the 20s, as Mark indicated earlier, then you know this is in the aftermath, right, of the war. So perhaps there's some of that history of grief, I suppose, in here. I do want to come back to the line like that. So yeah, I mean, I do think that the history of grief and love, like these are rather puzzling. But I do want to puzzle over the earlier line that Jenny had called our attention to. Silent is the sleep-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. Since we all seem to have a different interpretation of actually what is, what that image is, right? Like whether somebody is like leaning out of the moss-worn window or somebody was leaning and you can see the traces of the human trace beneath the moss, which has now grown in this, over this old window or abandoned building, right? I think it's, there's an interesting interplay between human traces and nature here that I think is really crucial for understanding, perhaps for unlocking the mysteries of this poem.
Okay, so a poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. Now, as the moon climbs would imply time going by, but in reality, the moon is not climbing. We're going around.
But it looks like it.
Right.
is.
No, that's true. Well, I mean, the moon is right. The moon doesn't climb. The moon does orbit the Earth, but so there's some sort of like optical illusion, right, or something that has to do with the human standpoint,
Right.
the way that we can perceive the heavens, which actually move in a way that's different from anything that we can observe because of the scale of it. So there's
Right.
something, there's also a sort of nature human interplay there as well, right? Like what the natural world does versus how we can observe it.
Perceive it. How we record it, we say the moon climbs, the moon's rising. We say that every single day and night. Moon rise, moon set.
Sunrise.
It's poetic tradition and the imagination.
Sorry?
It's a poetic tradition. You have that in poetry, you have that in literature. It's old-fashioned, it's archaic, it's our imagination that we are the center and everything moves around us.
Right.
Right, and in reality, by 1920, the theory of relativity had already happened, and we know that time is symmetrical forward and backward. We already have this sense that we just don't know the future. But the future is already out there. We can calculate it.
Right.
Time can be minus or plus a figure. It doesn't matter. There's no difference in physics between past and present, past and future. And that's known by 1920. The theory of relativity was in the teens.
We also have those two lines twice in the center of the poem. So they're the only lines that are repeated twice.
Which ones?
A poem should be
Motionless in time as the moon climbs is the start and the end of that central stanza of the poem. So those two lines are central to the poem.
No, I found them really interesting as well because they reminded me of what it means for like a piece of work or poetry to be like canonical and to be part of the canon. Because I think for like a poem or like a piece of writing to really kind of stay the same over time and kind of have the same value for a number of generations. I mean, it can't change because it has been written at some point, but the meaning that we kind of say it has, that changes over time. So that basically is like the moon. We think it changes. For us, it does, but it never actually changes. It always stays the same.
Yeah.
Really good point. And brings us back to this sort of objectivity of the natural world versus the perceptions on it by the human world. Right. So the poem is moon-like. I think that's strongly implied in this section of the poem. Motion time has to do with the perspective on it changing, that the poem sort of is almost this ancient thing like the moon that will always be there and always has been there, and it's more just on a day-to-day basis, our orientation in the cosmos is what it causes it to appear different, rather than anything that the moon itself is doing. Oh, Stanley, the eights and the phases of the moon.
Yeah.
So
it's because a stanza is circular, so it's like kind of it's making that circular kind of thing that that the loop of like the moon, the lunar thing, how we are connected to the moon. So I think that's why he repeats the two lines again to make it like a full circuit.
oh, right, that's a good point. Yeah, yeah. The cycles of the moon.
Yeah.
Is always follows the same cycle, and
Yeah.
will for not forever, but like as far as humans are concerned, it will be forever.
And the two couplets in between those two lines, leaving the moon releases and leaving the moon behind, winter leaves. I mean, those are pretty powerful lines.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that the poem has 24 lines? The day has 24 hours. It's a cycle.
Oh, interesting.
Wow, that's
And
interesting.
divided in 3 as sort of morning, afternoon, and night, right?
Yeah, but I'm still wondering why eight lines for couplets. I was thinking of the week, but the week has 7 days. So the 8th day is when we go back to the first day of the week again.
So it's sort of the
But the poem is repetitive. It starts by a poem should be, and then it ends with a poem should be again.
And you can see where not mean in the last line. Poems should not mean, which is it should be mute, and it should be, which is palpable. So we're going around.
Yeah. I also noticed that that thing about the grief, which Jenny was talking about, for all the history of grief, that has to go with the first 2 lines. When we read it with the first 2 lines, a poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, where he says that the poem need not actually portray the full history, the detailed history, but just like some symbols, just a few brush strokes, which will indicate of what the whole. So like, because maybe he's talking about memories of the war, grief.
I think it's important to notice the time frame. I didn't know it was 1926, but the whole globe was so affected by the First World War. And already the beginning of the second is happening. This
Yeah, the 20s are a complicated time. I think
Max, you asked us about the moss casement ledges where the moss has grown. That reminded me of Mosses from an Old Man's by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It goes to tradition, and the first 8 lines they are about tradition. As a globed fruit, you mentioned that it is provocative. It's the fruit of knowledge, it's Genesis, or the tree of knowledge, the fall of man, the fall of Adam and Eve. It's provocative, it has some erotic illusions. Poetry started as love poetry. Maybe that is what he has in mind. The old medallions are old, and with the adjective old, they are even older than usual medallions. And then, as I said before, the moss is from an old man's, and Nathaniel Hawthorne was quite traditional. He was a customs officer in the true sense of the word. He was a customs officer, and he also cared for customs, traditions. He's playing with that expression all the time. And MacLeish is in the same tradition.
Huh. Does anybody want to respond to that?
Yeah, so the irony that we feel some irony, that's he is trying to break from it. that, I mean, it's just so great that that first set of couplets, the last one doesn't really work unless you force it, as we did. That was great. So it's trying to break it. I was just, I pulled up at the same time the Ars Poetica of Ashbery, who's more like a language poet. The Uts Poetica is her name, and I think Uts Poetica is the Hector thing. And it's
Victor Police is your name, yeah.
That's right, c'est vrai. So just, just for a moment, just the jangle of words in a clump, like we've been looking at in language poetry, this is so much clearer. He's not going all the way to complete abstraction and incomprehension. He's not doing a May Bersenberger in these thoughtful lines that
Right.
we can't make anything of. We can, and we have for this for the moss on the ledge. We could probably dissect it down to the point where we have two interpretations at most, not really anymore. It's pretty clear. So it's different, but it's starting to. It's not just one. It's not that clear. It's not explanatory. It's not legalese. It can be ambiguous and should not mean but be. At the end, he's really going there.
I've put the Ashbery poem that you referenced here in the chat, which is a fun sort of take on the Ars Poetica. I mean, fun. He is complicated. Yeah, he is fun. He is fun. I don't think he needs to be fun, like haha fun, but more like he's having fun with it, but to make a more profound point. And it starts with, you can't say it that way anymore. That's the first line of his sort of Ars Poetica, of Ashbery's Ars Poetica. You can't say it that way anymore, which is such a forceful or a much more imperative version of MacLeish's "A poem should be palpable and mute." And it comes right back to this question of speaking, meaning making, right? You can't say it that way anymore. Saying in some ways like shut up, right? Like here's a different, this is a sort of different kind of muteness than MacLeish's muteness and quietness. This sort of he sort of like, it's a sort of escalation in some ways of what MacLeish is doing, where MacLeish is saying, a poem should be this, a poem shouldn't be this, a poem, and so forth. And Ashbery is just coming out and saying, no, a poem, it's a question of ethics and morals, like don't do this or something, right? I think the Ashbery it's much more complicated than that. It's not as like programmatic, but it's interesting to read that first line in relation, to the first line of this MacLeish poem, and to think about how this tradition of the Ars Poetica really does start with poets sitting down and saying, okay, a poem should be this and it shouldn't be that, and this is the starting point. And it has something to do with meaning making, and it has something to do with saying something one way and not saying it another way, or letting something speak for itself, or shutting up or something like that. It's about like drawing these lines in the sand and trying to figure out like what a poem is or should be or should do.
Do you think that all of these Ars Poetica poems are like written by people who are teaching a class about how to write a poem?
Not necessarily. I think it's a sort of, it's a tradition going back to Horace, right? That like there's some sort of the poets as the sort of keepers or stewards of their craft and profession, from time to time have to reflect on what they do and sort of say what it is what it is they imagine they're doing, right? And there's a sort of gatekeeping to it in a way, right? Like the sort of masters of the form of the craft are saying, this is how it should be, and everyone else is just are just pale imitators or something.
And what is-
try to
where does-
explain their art.
Hmm?
And they also try to explain their arts.
Right, right.
You also have that in Renaissance theater, where they have that in the plays that they explain what they are doing on stage.
Right. That's true. And the sort of the play within a play device that's very common as well, right? This sort of meta gesture that is kind of it's harder to pull off in other art forms. You can't. I don't know. Can you make a sculpture that's about what a sculpture should be? I mean, in a way, like every time you make a sculpture, I guess you are in some way saying what a sculpture should be, right? But it's not able to get that next level of
You can
Well,
only have that
that's what-
in literature.
Yeah, Rodin was doing that at the turn of the 20th century. You leave the marks of your tool in the work.
right. And that's a really good point, Terry. Yeah, thanks for
Mhm.
being in that art historical.
There was a French sculptor who once made this, how do you call it in English? The contraption where the thing usually is on. So a big block of stone.
Pedestal.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
made an empty one, and he wrote the world, Le Monde, upside down. So, so he made this the last
Yeah,
sculpture,
good.
which is everything. So, so it's possible to make
Right. No, that's
some kind of meta sculpture.
Yeah, I suppose there are different ways in which we can find this in like the plastic arts, right, and visual arts and stuff.
I really want to show you. I just looked it up. My favorite, one of my favorite Dutch poets. He died 2 years ago. He was called K. Schippers. And when the thing says a poem should be wordless as the flight of birds, it made me think about this. Let me show you. This is called line.
Oh.
And that's the first. The second is called line in text, and that is a
Oh my God.
the same line in a piece. It's from a newspaper, and the third is called text, and that's all the letters that the line goes through, and he explains it that he was reading the newspaper, and there was a fly who landed on the newspaper, and he wrote down the letters that he was walking on, and after a while it flew away, and he drew the line and made 3 poems out of it. So that's yeah, I really love that.
That's chance poetry. That's chance poetry, right?
And
That's going to come the coming week.
and it's wordless and it's meaningless, and it is. So.
And yeah, I mean, there are so many examples of that contemporary with MacLeish and after MacLeish, right? Like obviously after, but also, you know, contemporary with MacLeish of poets who are actually like experimenting, right? Being like high modernist or eventually like playing with things like Eliot's word poetry or shape poems.
I'm just reading about Schippers, and he's a neo-Dadaist. Basically, is what they call him.
That's a very Dada move. It reminds me of.
It's a very Dada move, but he's later. He's 50s.
Sure,
When Dada was being revived. Yeah. There's a good story in the New Yorker magazine this week about John Donne, and the first paragraph is that you can tell what's popular in poetry whether John Donne is in or out, because he wasn't a technician, he was a thinker. So I think he's realizing, I think MacLeish is realizing that we're going for thinkers now.
Mm.
Well, that's what he said. They said the change in MacLeish was after World War I, when he became more sensitive to what was going on, but he couldn't really explain it. I just wonder, Max, how Al would pull all this together so we could get onto the tarantula.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the answer is implied by the fact that there's no MacLeish in the syllabus. But I think as far as I know, unless it's like one of them snuck onto ModPo Plus, I don't know. I don't think so though. Yeah, I think that I think we did good work of playing with the ironic or not playing, not everything's playing, of looking at the ironic distance between what MacLeish is saying and what he's doing, right? And thinking of that as being a very telling distance, that there's an incongruity, and that says something about how MacLeish imagines this this project of writing, the ultimate poem, what a poem should be, or also perhaps also the projects of Ars Poetica in general, this idea of prescribing what a poem should be in poetry, like it's actually sort of while it's potentially like a very radical meta thing, it's also like kind of difficult, right? Like it's sort of hard to do that reflection, right? And to do it sort of in a pure way that honors your intentions. And I think that there's that slippage there between what he says and what he does is kind of telling. So yeah, how about we move on to the tarantulas, since I think that one probably deserves a good hour or so. Tarantulas on the Lifebuoy. I'm gonna paste this in the chat in case anybody needs it. I think MacLeish pulled off a complicated subject within the traditional mode, which I think you're right, and I think that's kind of maybe what he's trying to do, right? He's sort of at a turning point between or with literary modernism, or what's to come and what came before. All right, Thomas Lux's Tarantulas on the Lifebuoy, which I believe is from the 90s, unless Mark, you have a more precise date. It's fine. you had the MacLeish date down.
The book was published in 1986. It was from a book called Half Promised Land.
Oh, 86.
Published in 1986.
Oh, great. So this
I've gone off down a huge rabbit hole from this poem. I found loads of his other poems. I found him talking about his poems on YouTube. And thank you, Mark. I've had a really great time. All I can say is I wish that ModPo would check out the toad and put this back instead.
But this is you mean the toad poem.
The toad poem.
Yeah,
it isn't the poem I object to so much, it's the conversation about it.
Oh, okay. It's I mean that poem, the toad poem, is in the syllabus as a sort of provocation, right? It's like this is the bad way to do poetry or something.
But anyway,
but
that's
I think
just an aside. But I have had so much fun from this, Mark, and thank you very much.
Well, let's get into it then. I'll quickly read it aloud, and then we can dive right in. Tarantulas on the Lifebuoy. For some semi-tropical reason, when the rains fall, relentlessly they fall into swimming pools, these otherwise bright and scary arachnids. They can swim a little, but not for long, and they can't climb the ladder out. They usually drown, but if you want their favor, if you believe there is justice or reward for not loving the death of ugly and even dangerous, the eel, hog, snake, rats, creatures, if you believe these things, then you would leave a lifebuoy or two in your swimming pool at night. And in the morning, you would haul ashore the huddled, hairy survivors and escort them back to the bush. And be assured that at least these saved as individuals would not turn up again someday in your hat, drawer, or the tangled underworld of your socks. And that even when your belief in justice merges with your belief in dreams, they may tell the others in a sign language 4 times as subtle and complicated as man's that you are good, that you love them, that you would save them again. It's
A funny poem.
it's funny. It's really, yeah, this was a great suggestion. I have to agree. Yeah, I don't know, let's just run with it. What I mean, I think the story, as it were, is clear, right? He's saying like these tarantulas fall in the pool when it rains, and it would be so nice if you could save them, but because then maybe they would, they would recognize your graciousness or your benevolence, and that would be its own reward. But what I mean, it's still rather odd, right? Like tarantulas and Lifebuoys. I mean, he's writing this.
Can I give you the background?
Yeah, go for it, Jenny.
Yeah.
When he read it. And what he said was he was working at one point on a small island where there was only one swimming pool, and that somebody told him this story, and that he couldn't resist making it into a poem. And that's the way he wrote a lot of his poems. He would see or hear something which he thought was a bit left field, and that's what he would turn into a poem. I mean, he wrote other kinds of poems as well, but there are quite a lot of poems which are as oddball as this because he's come across something as oddball as this.
Do you know where the island was?
No, he didn't say.
Okay, I mean, it's semi-tropical.
I'm just going to say that's Ars Poetica, or Ars Poesis. Yeah, you do unto other tarantulas as you would have them do unto you.
That's right.
I
I
would
mean,
say there's a Zen quality to it, Terry.
a Zen quality.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a sort of morality that he's elaborating, right?
Oh, it's
Yeah.
about the judgment of that which is ugly and that we push aside, because actually people have tarantulas for pets, you know. When I was growing up, I did see them, but I've never seen them in a house. I don't think they like being in a house. So I think it's what they stand for. What does a tarantula stand for? What is the
CJ, you're saying that you saw them in the wild?
Yeah.
Okay. And
in
where?
Southern California? I grew up in Southern California.
Okay, right.
But if it was a pet, it was in a cage.
Yeah,
right? It was in a cage as a pet.
See kids taking them out and holding them and not me.
But if they bite you, they are harmful to humans, right? Are they as bad as like a black widow spider?
Not at all.
No, they're not.
They're not poisonous, right? Are they?
They're not poisonous, and they're very, very shy. We've had torrential rains here in the last couple of weeks in southern New Mexico, and there are lots of tarantulas. And just yesterday, my wife helped a tarantula across the street in the traffic. She walked like a safety patrol and helped it go across the street.
So she's scoring karma points for the tarantula.
Yeah.
She was, in fact, I read her this poem and I said, "You were the life buoy for that tarantula."
So
How big are they? How big are tarantulas? I've never seen one.
Oh, they're whole hand size.
yeah, they're like the size of your hands. They can be really like, I mean, scary for that reason, but it's true, they are harmless and shy. Like they're not like out to get you or something, right? Like they're just big spiders, and for I don't know, for
We're not big
part of
on their
humanity,
food.
we're not used to that, you know.
We're not big on their food list, you know.
Yeah, no, I think it would take a lot of
I think that's true, but I also think there's a kind of commonly held fear of them.
for sure.
There are a lot of people who are afraid of any spider, but a spider that gets as big as your hand and that they've never seen is like something extra fearful.
So it's about judging the ugly and the different.
Yes. And it reminds me of D.H. Lawrence's snake at the water trough. He loves this snake so much that he just watches it. But the culture that he's in is saying you should always kill them if you see them because they're poisonous snakes. But he can't because it's so beautiful.
Exactly. Snakes are beautiful. More beautiful than tarantulas.
Well, for Lux, they're all the same, right? I mean, you mentioned the hog snake, the eel, these other serpentine creatures, rats, you know, the classic, you know, the vermin par excellence. Even rats are, you know, if you believe these things, if you believe that they deserve to live or shouldn't just be wantonly killed, then, you know, there's this whole world of things that humanity is so ready to eradicate or is fearful of. Perhaps like, you know, unduly, I mean, especially I would say in the West and the global North, like big insects is just something we're not really used to. Like it's just.
Did you guys struggle with that? It's like a triple, quadruple, quintuple negative, a reward. Do you believe there is just as a reward for not loving the death of the ugly and even dangerous creatures? I mean, I can't unpack that. Too many negatives for me to know what you stand for.
Yeah, thanks for calling our attention to that, Kurt. Maybe we should parse this out a little bit. This middle of the poem, they usually drown, but if you want their favor, if you believe there is justice, that is to say a reward for not loving the death of ugly and even dangerous creatures, if you believe these aforementioned things, then you would leave a lifebuoy or two in your swimming pool at night. There's a lot of ifs.
Yeah,
A lot being predicated, or this idea of leaving the lifebuoys in your pool is predicated on a lot of rather slippery conditions. If you want their favor, which I find very strange, and not nearly as easy to grasp as something like if you believe there's no reward, if you believe there's a reward for not loving the death of ugly and even dangerous creatures, that I get a little bit more. But if you want their favor,
but at the end of the poem is all about the favors that they're going to give you. They're not going to turn up in your hat drawer, in your hat or your drawer.
right? But that I find that so interesting is that he imagines this being the reward. So in one way, there's an openness to nature that he wants to have, right? This like, oh, you know, we'll help out the little spiders. They're not so bad. But then the reward is this like reassertion of the division between the animal and the human world, right? Of being like it's not like we're all going to coexist and get along. It's like, I saved your life, now get the hell out of my house. Like there's something like really like kind of it's sort of surprising in that moment, the what he imagines the reward and the favor to be, to out of this act of sort of like interspecies benevolence.
Good karma.
I think that was interesting as well, because if they drown, they won't turn up in your house either.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can just leave them. Right.
So if they're dead, like we kill all kinds of stuff we don't want in our houses, but that's not the reason why you won't want to find them in your sock drawer. The reason is because you're good.
Yeah, exactly. There's this almost like having your cake and eating it too, where it's like not only will you not come in my house, which I really can't stand, but I will have earned your favor by showing you mercy rather than brute force.
Is he mocking our very simplistic idea of justice? Like human beings, very simplistic idea of like, if we do this, then good karma, and we do this back. And so all our actions are kind of transactional. We do this because for a quid pro quo, right? We do this for this.
That's a really good point. That's Right.
Yeah.
The idea of justice is very transactional here, and it seems to be this is a somewhat satirical poem. So it seems to be that perhaps he's satirizing that notion of justice.
Yeah.
I think that's very clear in the stanza about the sign language, which starts
Yeah.
out, I think,
That's subtle, yeah.
yeah, because 4 times as subtle and complicated as man's. When I first read it for maybe a second or so, I was really touched, and then I thought about, wait a minute, 4 times as subtle. That means all their legs are up in the air and they're lying on their belly, and it's completely ridiculous.
Right.
So, with our sign language, we always leave some extremities to stand on. So when I really realized it was really all their legs, it all fell apart and got really funny again.
But it's interesting how that's a great like reading of the number of signing. And it's interesting how subtlety increases with the number of signing digits that you have, like, which is not what we would think. Like in some ways you can imagine this perfect sign language where if you had infinite arms, you could communicate, or hands, you could communicate anything, right? Like because you'd be able to just you'd be able to basically make shapes and letters and stuff like a text. But here, like the more arms that are involved, the more complicated it becomes to discern.
Yeah, wouldn't it be fun to have like a Richter scale for how subtle you are? That joke was on a scale from 1 to 10. I'd say a 9.
Right. The subtlety scale.
It's also mocking our ideas of charity and helping out people, helping out nations, and giving, donating, and you never know what happens to all those funds, which enters into hands of despots and people, middlemen, and all that. It's like it's this whole idea that that can be done in a world, right? I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes
the more hands it goes through,
right.
the less it leaves out for the people who really need it.
Yeah.
It's all to make yourself feel good.
Yeah.
Not really to help people.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that. So what exactly is the charitable act that Lux is performing? Like in
we have to remind ourselves that when he read the poem, he told the real reason why people leave out the Lifebuoys, which is just to make sure that the dead tarantulas don't clog the filter. The filter, right? Yeah. So it's
yes.
All that good stuff is all in his head.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah. So I mean, like, what other acts could he have performed in order to reap the same reward? What else could he have done to save these tarantulas' lives? And why is it the Lifebuoys? Why is this?
Even 2 in a small swimming pool.
A nocturnal lifeguard.
And could tarantulas climb onto a Lifebuoy any more than they could climb up the ladder? That's what I mean.
That's a good point. It doesn't seem it's still a very human-centered solution, let's say.
Yeah.
Empty the swimming pool.
You could empty the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Right?
Or cover it.
Yeah, and maybe, he's just lazy. He doesn't want to cover it. He doesn't want to take that tool and get all the leaves out, which would be the Lifebuoys, would just be a leaf floating in the pool.
Right.
He doesn't want to do any of that. So instead of saying, listen, I'm too lazy to get this done, I'm doing an act of charity instead.
Right.
Yeah, I throw something in the pool and leave it at that. It's the minimum amount of work.
Yeah.
That's exactly that's exactly it, Jeroen. Yeah, it's a sort of bare minimum that he's imagining you can do, and it doesn't involve like much inconvenience to him, and it certainly doesn't involve draining or covering the pool, which would be not only a lot of work, but would mean that he couldn't then use the pool the next day. It's nor is it, you know, having, you know, staying up all night with the skimmers so you can pull them off the top when they do plop in. It's about like leaving something out there so they can kind of figure it out on their own. And also get out of your pool and get out of your home, get off your property, basically.
And it's good
Well,
for us to remember that it's not his pool. You know, his narrator in the poem is not him, because his poem is about a story he's been told.
Sure.
I like that because it gives him much more flexibility.
Yeah.
He's
And
adopting
where-
a persona.
And
So
where
he
do
he
the,
can wind us up much more than if it was his pool, I think.
yeah. And where do the tarantulas fall from? Are there trees hanging over the pool? You know, where do they fall from? That's a good.
Oh, they're washed in by the rains, aren't they? So maybe the pool's in a dip. Who knows?
Or maybe they're clinging to the sides of the house or something, and the rain spout is.
Stanley, can you give us your southern New Mexico wisdom?
They do climb up the walls, and they are on the screen doors, and we do see them out here a lot. And I would think that if he trimmed all the limbs and trees around his pool, he'd have less tarantulas.
Okay.
That would
Well,
also
I
make more work.
I like the fact that he wasn't the narrator, that he's retelling a story. So that.
But
It
are
just
the
gives him complete
tarantulas
carte blanche.
important? Are the tarantulas important? They do not come up in the poem again. The expression is only in the title.
It's a good point.
He has the arachnids. Okay, so he's talking about spiders. He talks about dangerous animals like the eel, hawk, snake, rats, but tarantulas only in the title.
And huddled, hairy survivors, tarantulas are hairy.
They have 8 legs.
And then references back to them, yes.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Jenny?
Can't remember.
Oh, okay. That's a good point, Mark. I think that right, without the title, we wouldn't know what he's talking about. But it's an interesting choice to sort of open with the image and the title, tarantulas on the Lifebuoy, and not
Well,
really.
then they can be any ugly creature. You know, we
Right,
should be
right.
kind to, you know, hunchbacks. And I mean, I'm just making as well, right?
It's also like the New York poets making their title the first line of the poem.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And just something we might want to look at is, I suppose that becomes irrelevant in what I was going to say. Relentlessly they fall, and then the gap into swimming pools. And then, but not for long, and the gap into they can't climb the ladder. It's very strange places he's put his gaps between verses. And Terry, I'm sorry I interrupted you. I thought you'd finished when I started.
I currently have a problem with squirrels digging up my bulbs, and I try to be, you know, Buddhist about it, but I go and chase the squirrels and I spray stuff at them, and then somebody told me to put plastic forks around so they couldn't get into my bulbs. And yesterday I decided, okay, I have to make peace with the squirrels, which are tarantulas for Stanley. But I said, okay, you can't go in the bird bath. You can go and drink. Now I'm a 1/4 mile from a lake. They can go down to the lake. They're very fast, but you know, it's not happening. And so squirrel comes, squirrel drinks, and then goes and digs up a bulb. I'm going to be mean again. No lifesaver. Those squirrels are annoying me. And so that becomes my problem, right? Because I'm not having a broader acceptance. And I think that's what this poem is about, is accepting what's happening on some levels.
Yeah, no, that's true. So I mean, is the acceptance then? So, what would be acceptance here for the speaker of this poem? Would it be something like letting them drown in the pool? Or would it be something like being okay with them being in your sock drawers? Or would it, I mean, like, what is the, so like he accepts, I mean, there's a sort of like acceptance to the extent that he, you know, as he puts it, does not love the death of other creatures, which is a very interesting way to sort of frame this sort of morality, right? He's like, listen, I don't love it when ugly things die, so I'm a good guy, all right. You know, which is like really, again, the very bare minimum. And he right. So he's sort of, he imagines putting out these lifebuoys, doing this tiny charitable act, but what would actual, like, a sort of real selflessness look like in this poem for this speaker? Like, what would it take to, you know, can we imagine what would truly be a selfless act for this in this poem? Would it be to coexist with the tarantulas in a different way, rather than in this very, like, well compartmentalized way? Kurt, do you have something you want to?
Well, let me answer that in a direct way. One of the things is this possible there's a critique of religion? Because in a weird way, I mean, I thought of this because I have ants in my house, and you know, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I see this ant. He go, doo, 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 doo. He's sort of like going, "I'm whistling while you work. I'm going to get some stuff and bring it back to the hive," and then bam, I kill it. It's like this thunderbolt from the sky. I've judged it. You don't deserve to live. So I'm playing God, and so here, a little bit at the end, when you say that you're good, that you love them, that you would save them again, that sounds a lot like a Christian God, doesn't it?
Sure.
And to answer your question, what is the solution? It may be that in religion there is no real solution. There is good and evil, and we say God is good, but evil still persists. So maybe that is an indirect way of answering your question, Max. What is this? What is the solution?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kurt. And you're actually making me think of the other sorts of allusions to Judeo-Christian religion. I mean, the fall at the beginning, it's repeated twice. When the rains fall relentlessly, they fall. There's this sort of fall from grace, I suppose, and in the very first stanza, that sort of at the end we have the redemption. Jeez, I'm like blanking on words today. I don't know what's going on. There's you're right. There's this sort of redemption at the end of the sort of Christ-like redemption of God as a good being that loves his creations and wants to save them from original sin.
If God were the Society for the Protection of Animals, then this is the law that would be laid down to us.
And you all are on the right track. I once met Thomas Lachs in Saarbrücken here in Germany, and I think I was talking about this poem, and then afterwards he asked me, didn't you notice it's a religious poem? We are in the American South. It's semi-tropical, everybody has a swimming pool, and it is about saving people. The Lifebuoy, you know that the phrase sent him a lifeline. That is what he tried to use, but it didn't really fit. It is judging and helping people to convert them.
Yeah, I see that, because you may tell the others that you are good and that you love them. But
Yeah, but in a
it's like the religion, the preaching thing.
And in a sign language 4 times as subtle. The more subtle you can get, the better chance you have of getting into their house and giving them a Bible, you know.
Did I mention that? We're talking about the American South, or it's set in the American South. That is the Bible Belt. It's the most religious part of the US.
Yeah. So the island that he's working on, that Jenny referenced, is somewhere in the South, Mark. Somewhere in the US, the American South, where there are tarantulas. And presumably in the Bible Belt South, so like, Louisiana East.
That the island might not be what he's writing the poem about. The island, the story on the island was where he got the idea from.
Right.
One of the things that he said, because I listened to an interview with him as well, and one of the things he said was how long it took him to write a poem, that some people dash them off. But he's usually doing at least 10 revisions to a poem until he gets what he wants. And he often is working from these ideas that he's picked up somewhere. But I'm not clear from what he said or from looking at his poems that what he's actually writing about is necessarily set in the place where he picked up the idea. So it would seem the island could be anywhere. The island might be down near Stanley somewhere, for all we know, where there are tarantulas. But the poem could still be about the Bible Belt, as Mark's saying.
Sure. I mean, it seems right. Yeah, that if we take it as being in the Bible Belt, it could be somewhere like Louisiana or somewhere like near the Gulf or something. I guess they have tarantulas down there. I actually don't know. Yeah, I didn't know if they were just in any more temperate regions, or maybe more so found in the kind of the deserts of the Southwest. But
I have not seen him in northern New Mexico. We have
have not
black
seen-
widows. No tarantulas here. I'm in Santa Fe, which is northern New Mexico, as we like to distinguish ourselves from where Stanley lives. But
So
there's,
kind of
like Key West, or Key West is tropical, all those islands off the Keys off of Florida, off the coast of South Carolina. There, it could be, anywhere. And just as easily he could have seen it anywhere. But we know it's tropical, he's saying, where you get a lot of rain and they would drop off from the
at least
trees.
semi-tropical.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, semi-tropical.
But maybe
Jenny, that the space that you were talking about, those are really nice, like, because you do, or the tangled underworld of your socks. I mean, that's a great space. Yeah.
And that's also religious. What's the underworld?
underworld, of course,
It's
yeah.
hell.
Yeah, right. It's definitely religious, but your socks and underwear are a little bit of a nightmare for the Baptists as well. They don't like to find it.
I kind of all of a sudden got the feeling that he was writing about Bermuda, because there's lots of tarantulas in Bermuda. It is an island out in the middle of nowhere, and everybody is concerned about their water and their pools. And so
I think that it's a rich person. The owner of the swimming pool must be rich, because first he has a swimming pool, and then it's a very large one, because he has 2 Lifebuoys in it.
That's true.
Even if you have one in it, it's quite a large pool, but here you have even 2.
And on this little island, if there's only one pool, it might belong to a hotel.
Oh, okay.
Right, if he was working.
I just thought of that now, because it might belong to a rich person, but it might belong to a hotel, because this whole idea of the story of the people living on the island telling this story about the tarantulas falling into the only swimming pool. There's a kind of, for me, there's a kind of, oh, well, serves them right for being rich enough to have a swimming pool that all the spiders fall into. Do you see what I mean? It's it's like the people telling the story are not the people owning the swimming pool for me.
But I think
but he specifically made it your swimming pool. So I think he has taken the story and made it into the people that have responsibility for it. If you create this world where other people, other creatures aren't going to survive, how responsible are you? What's your responsibility? Is it CJ just saying, good day, squirrel, hello? Or is it, actually taking out the trap, or scooting them on, putting a line of sugar away from your property, Kurt, so that the ants go elsewhere. I don't know.
That's a really good point, Terry.
It's a-
The idea of having some responsibility for the conditions you create, which is, you know, the idea of creation, of course, brings us back to some of the religious or Christian, Judeo-Christian illusions we were talking about. But I think, yeah, there's also just there's even a more specific human critique of people who have, you know, the means to build themselves certain things like swimming pools, which are relatively common in the warm parts of the United States, and not just you know, they don't just always belong to wealthy people. There's like a lot of like middle class homes with swimming pools. So it can be like a broader critique that's not like entirely tied to wealth. But something, yes, so just like what, you know, what is the responsibility we have for what we create in nature? If we create places where innocent tarantulas drown all the time, you know, what responsibility do we have to those tarantulas? I mean, what can we do? And the sort of send up, the satire is to sort of imagine somebody who's really just unwilling to let go of that pool. Like, this person's gonna have their pool, so help them God. And it's the tarantulas who are gonna figure it out, right? And maybe we'll help them out a little bit. We'll put the life buoys in there, but those tarantulas better get out of the pool, because I'm not gonna close the pool. I'm not gonna fill it in. I'm not gonna, you know, I want my pool, damn it. Like, this is what I earned.
Yeah, and it's telling that he says these otherwise bright arachnids. So he thinks they're stupid to fall into the swimming pool.
Oh yeah, these otherwise bright. Yeah, that's a great reading. Right. That they're, you know, normally they know what they're doing, but when the rains fall, they lose it, right?
Yeah. So if I save them once, then they should know better the next time.
Which is exactly the Christian idea, isn't it? We
Yeah.
save you once and you'll know better next time.
That's right. And then in even more cynical, when he says, when your belief in justice merges with your belief in dreams, they can even spread the word.
You know, I remember we used to have a soap in America called Lifebuoy, and one of the advertisements was that it floats, and it's a bar of soap, and a tarantula could conceivably get onto that bar of soap and float.
So how many bars of soap would you need per night?
And was it red? Because the British Lifebuoy soap was red, really weird stuff. I
Ours
remember
was-
as a child.
Green.
Ours was white.
Oh, I thought it was green.
Oh, maybe, yeah, you know, I don't think I ever unpacked one. You know. It was a green wrapper.
Oh.
Anybody taken by the first words, for some semi-tropical reason? Because usually reason doesn't need an adjective, does it? I mean, it's as
And if it
though
did, you was semi-tropical.
usually say for some reason in the semi-tropics, you'd say.
Yeah, that's a good point, for some semi-tropical reason. And it's also,
I think that's pretty cool.
it is pretty cool, and it's very, thanks for calling your attention to that, because it's actually it's not only is it a strange turn of phrase, but it posits a rather complicated logic too for the poem, where it's saying, for some semi-tropical reason, for some reason that flows, for some reason having to do with this specific ecosystem, but it's also something that's sort of thrown out of balance, right? So it's like, it's you know, this is how the ecosystem functions, but it also functions in such a way that, like, these otherwise bright spiders sort of lose their grip, and they start sliding around and falling into swimming pools. He's positing a kind of ecosystem that's not entirely consistent.
Yeah, and you could replace semi-tropical with Bible Belt for some Bible Belt reason.
Sure. Yeah, and right,
What year was this written?
80s, late 80s.
Okay.
Um,
So the ecological awareness has begun.
oh, absolutely, yeah. For sure by now.
Or maybe
Yeah.
it's just that a lot of different worlds have different reasons to them, a different logic to them. I mean, you know, on Earth, in some sense, the laws of physics is for the whole universe. But I guess he's saying there might be another world where a different law exists. And in the semi-tropics, they have different structure of rules, much like in culture, say, in culture, you know, you go to different place, you have different rules. But usually don't change the laws of physics. You know?
yeah, no, that's
But somehow he's implying there's a place here where the laws of the way things act, or biology or zoology, change in the semi-tropics.
right. That there, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that there's something exceptional about this semi-tropical region that where things don't function as expected.
Yeah, and he also doesn't care why. For some reason, here in the
Right.
tropics,
Yeah.
now
That's
it
a good
rains,
point,
now
too.
it rains spiders, you know.
That's true. Yeah, and it also, right, like that's a great observation, because he kind of makes it into the problem of the climate, of the ecosystem, rather than, you know, if as we were saying earlier, if it has something to do with, the poem is something to do with claiming responsibility for what you create in the world and the impact it has on others, it doesn't seem to enter into the speaker's mind at all, right? He's not saying like, I mean, the reason why tarantulas are falling into your pool is because you dug a pool in your backyard, right? But he's being like, for whatever reason, down here in these kooky parts, like whenever there's those big rains, they're all just falling in my pool. It's like, yeah, that's
Yeah,
what's
he's like,
gonna
I'm
happen
just
if you
a
have a
simple
pool.
guy. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
He's like, I'm just a simple guy. I just want to
Yeah.
be in the semi-tropics and have a pool and enjoy
Right.
myself. And now there's all these spiders.
Right. This, yeah, this ecosystem isn't behaving as I expected.
I like the sun, but I hate the spiders.
Right.
There's also, to me, that he's a much more interesting poet than you think he's going to be when you read the opening bit. You read the opening bit and you laugh because he's made it so funny. And it isn't until if you want their favor that you've really got to dig in much. I mean, we've dug in because we've dug into the whole poem, but he starts it off as a kind of throwaway poem and then gradually hauls us in like a fisherman.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
I'd like to go back to Mark, who you actually met him, you said? Could you expand on that a little bit more when you said we were spot on when we were talking about this? And I like that. I'd like to go to your line, we were spot on, and expand on that.
What do you expect me to do?
I wanted you to expand on your visit with him.
Oh, it's so many years ago. No, I have no add-ons.
Well, the idea was that we were beginning an interpretation of this as being a critique of organized religion, specifically Christianity. And Mark, you're saying that was something that Lux confided to you at some point, that this was in fact what he was trying to do with the poem.
So the folks that haven't spoken Unia, Michael, are you scared of spiders, tarantulas? Do you think they're poisonous?
Always. No, I think it's really interesting just what Jenny was saying, because I agreed that at first I thought the poem was quite ordinary in a way and a bit just not boring, but I didn't know where it was going till we got to the if you want their favor part, because I think that's when it really gets strange. Whereas before, when I read the first stanza, I thought it was really meta in a way, just about poetry maybe, with the they, that he didn't really know what they was. So I think at first I thought, well, they is the rain, or like they are the rain falls and stuff. So I thought, well, maybe that's poetry and something. And then you continue to read, and then it gets really strange. You know, well, okay, it's about arachnids, and suddenly they're drowning, and you save them, and then it's all about justice, and in the end about God. So I thought it was really a very interesting, strange poem.
I was I didn't know anything about tarantulas. Obviously, that they're spiders, but not about people's perceptions of them. But we have sort of similar ones in Australia, like that you could equate to the idea. Like typically, the really big ones are the most scary, but the most harmless as well. And the nicer looking ones are actually the more poisonous. And then I was kind of thrown off then about the hog snakes. I didn't know what hog snakes were, but like trying to connect those to the tarantula as well, I found it a bit difficult.
Does anybody
You
know
know,
what a hog snake is? I looked it up, but I had never seen. I mean, as far as I knew. Oh,
Yeah,
Stanley.
see, this the semi-tropical knowledge.
Okay,
So this,
yeah.
you have this, yeah.
In fact, they're non-poisonous, and they're prevalent around the Southwest here. You know, so.
Hog snakes.
And they're very shy. Most snakes are really, really shy.
Right. They don't want anything to do with you.
And the only reason the rattlers rattle is because they don't want to be stepped on.
Right.
And a hog will eat a snake.
Really?
That's an aside.
The pictures I have of hog snakes show them with a bit of a snout. Maybe that's why they're called that.
Oh.
They have a little snout.
Oh.
Yeah.
They're not big and round.
Or pink.
Yeah, the hognose snake. Yeah, it's a little bit of a pig nose, I guess, right?
Oh, you're right. That's
When
hog nose snake, not a hog
Yeah.
snake.
Yeah, hog-nosed snake. And when I read this poem to my wife, she said, hog-nosed snakes aren't ugly. I wonder why he would.
Yeah, they're quite lovely. Right?
They're beautiful.
And I don't think eels are that dangerous.
I don't know. Eels are not dangerous, right? I mean,
More
rats spread disease. So they threaten people in that way, but they're not like rats aren't conspiring to spread disease to kill humanity, right? It's like what happens.
Scavengers cleaning up after humans, right?
Yeah.
So they're doing a service.
Right.
And they carry some disease as they encounter it. I don't know how that happens, but
He also says that they are ugly. I think that's the point.
well,
that you have these low creatures, and I still believe that the owner of the swimming pool is a rich person. So you have that huge contrast between a rich person and these low creatures.
So it's about judgment, going back to Christian point of view.
That's a good comparison. Yeah, there's judgment being rendered on these creatures by somebody with more power. Sort of uneven relationship.
And the rich man can't go to heaven.
This one probably thinks he will, but
only if he's political.
Any concluding thoughts on this poem? I think it's such a well crafted satire of very human ideas of justice and benevolence. I mean, perhaps there's a meta poetic angle that we didn't fully explore. I think we started to, maybe it was Terry who got us on that at the very beginning. Something about the kind of grace that the speaker imagines in this poem is maybe some sort of like, there's something poetic to it. but then we
telling the
complicate-
poetic truth, but Unia just said exactly that, it does turn in the literal to something else, but let's stay with your first thought, which was that it's about poetry pouring down, words pouring. How can we just keep going with that same meta that this is all about poetry?
Yeah, right, with this like love for, or yeah, I mean, that's a hard reading to perform now that we've really complicated the idea of grace that's presented in the poem, because it doesn't seem like this openness to ugly things. It seems like it's a very calculated attitude towards non-human things, towards the natural world, the object world, and perhaps it's implied as well, it's the human world, right? I mean, we're talking a bit about these ideas of mercy and the hairy huddled survivors. Like that's, I mean, the tarantulas cease to be arachnid at that point. They become very human. And so there's all these ideas about humans, the way that humans treat not only animals but each other. And perhaps
All right, but let's take it to the meta, Max. So what if this is 80s, this is postmodern, could it be the ugly words, non-rhyming, like the language poetry, we see these chunks of prose, and ugly things like Ron Silliman's trip on the BART. Is it okay if we take these ugly things, will they not come back to bite us? Will we get praise for our work? If you make like the current thing in painting in a lot of ways today is for people to show their skill, that they can paint something kind of representational, and then they smear it or they do some kind of thing to put the hand of the artist on it. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Kind of really contemporary art has always got some kind of smear in the painting, some kind of, hey, I'm a human and I did it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I can
Like
kind
you'll
of
see,
yeah.
drips. Pardon?
Cave painting, the first petroglyph.
Well, but it's contemporary stuff. Contemporary painters to make painting important again, because painting, was dead in the 60s. So try to make painting important. People are painting these things that are really ugly, which is a lot like what was happening in poetry. It went away from meter and rhyme. But they keep the hand they definitely make sure it was hand drawn.
When you think about postmodernism, I think sign language, when you go where that language is some kind of signal, and then you could argue that he hopes that there is some kind of sign language, some way of articulating that is so subtle that you can even say that you're good.
It's
right.
Is
Gertrude Stein just full of nonsense? Is she just a nonsense poet? Or is she the brilliant founder of modernism that we, in ModPo think she is? I mean, it really is. There's a little of that in this.
Yeah.
You got to make it 8 times more subtle.
That's right. When you have the complete portrait of Picasso, she writes it with 8 hands, right? With all the repetition in it.
But I really like this idea of the poem as being in dialogue with a larger aesthetic conversation about ugliness and ugly things. Despite the sort of satire that's happening, perhaps that I take your point, Terry, that could very well be, there's this sort of larger cultural conversation or sort of conversation and aesthetic conversation that's taking place in the postmodern period that this poem is potentially in dialogue with, and thus that kind of gives us the means to perform a meta reading. And I think you're right. The sign language there is that's totally postmodernism in a way, right? This signs and language. It's kind of hard not to see that in that.
Right, and we're not saying that you have behaved well. We'd use the adjective for good, well instead of good. You are good, meaning you're a good poet. You're a good person. We use it like that. We don't say you wrote well or you behaved well. We're
Right.
saying good, that you are good. You are
Good as
elevated.
in morally good. Yeah.
And
Well,
good
sure, we've read it that way, but also that you are a good poet. You get to, I mean, we hardly say this in ModPo that anybody's a bad poet, but we know bad poets.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We usually suspend those value judgments. That's true.
we don't put them in a syllabus.
Right. Yeah. To begin with.
But
We
when you
level.
say good, it implies evil. And it kind of that takes me to Dante with the flood of the water from the rain and the tarantulas and going into the inferno with that. I'm sorry, I just went way astride, but it kind of goes with the Christian point of view. I know we're wrapping up.
No, I mean, if you
that's-
write bad poetry, is that evil? If you write,
No, I don't want to read it. I have a choice.
But in this poem, it's like it's a good thing, right? He's like this poet role model, maybe, that's like, if you write a bad poem, I will still love you, and then you will love me because I love you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And then there's this grace that comes back. Right. That's actually perhaps the
Can you be saved after a bad poem? That's another question.
well, I mean, yeah. When your belief in justice merges with your belief in dreams.
Well, I want to go to what Al said at the 10-year celebration. He said he doesn't teach his classes anymore. He convenes them, and they sort of go like we did this morning, And so we had how many people? 12 people, and we had a really nice discussion, and we're all uplifted a bit by talking about the words and the tarantulas, and it's been a good day, and I can't wait till the next time.
Here. Thanks, Stanley. That was a really nice.
I'm so happy.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. This was indeed.
Thank you.
This was indeed uplifting. It's towards the end of the day for us.
Yeah.
Here on the other side of the pond. But for those whose days are just beginning. Yeah, CJ, I hope you have a great rest of your day, Stanley.
Yeah.
Dead.
Vijaya, you're also in North America, right?
Yeah, I'm in California, Northern California.
Oh
Reading,
wow!
yeah.
Oh
But
yeah.
we're
It's now 8 a.m. 8 a.m. So my day is beginning. My day is beginning. But this is a wonderful day. We are, in fact, my community here, we are celebrating Diwali, our festival of lights tonight.
Oh,
Having a party. So yeah.
and Terry as well. Let me not forget, Terry, that you are also in the US, so you have a
our day is beginning now, right? Yeah.
yeah, you could see the sunrise as I was making coffee this morning.
That's really cool.
Stanley and I are at 9 o'clock now.
Yes.
I admire all of your your abilities to tune in first thing on a Saturday morning.
Well,
It's
and
great.
what
Much
about
appreciated.
Michael? Michael is in Australia, right?
I'm in Spain.
Oh, in Spain.
Okay.
Good. And Unia, how's England? How's school?
Great. London is nice. I feel very good here. So I'm still getting used to everything, but I feel very good. And how's the house going for you?
We have a kitchen. I made coffee this morning. It was quite pleasurable.
Yeah, and you were making applesauce the other day.
Yes, I've made applesauce from my tree. I have an apple tree. Pardon?
When was this meeting where Terry was making applesauce? Was this?
It was at the-
Jason's our office hour. Jason's
Jason-
office.
Cool. Nice.
Jason, the author of Making Butter. I was making applesauce. It was very interested.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So yeah, no, this is great. And Stanley, we'll have to get together next time we drive across state.
Yes, I'm in a group from Santa Fe, right? We read poetry every Tuesday.
Oh,
But
great. So
it's
do you
all
come up
Zoom.
here? Oh,
No,
okay.
everything is Zoom, you know? You don't have to rent cars or get hotels or anything.
That's great.
But
Let's do. And I think Unia is getting a little bit of an American accent. Did you hear her?
I am. That's
You are.
amazing.
You're getting an American accent.
That's all of you guys. I have no American people here. It's all British.
The
one shout out to the Kelly Writers House.
And
Uh,
thank
you
you,
know-
Max, for getting us together. I mean, it's really.
Yes.
my
It-
pleasure as always.
Thank you, Max. Yeah.
So I think we're meeting again in 2 weeks or something.
Yeah.
And the hour will be changed by then, so.
Yeah.
It will all be in the middle.
No, in 3 weeks, 19th of November.
Okay, cool.
I'm just looking at my schedule now. Yeah.
And
we're
is
gonna
it Jaren? I don't know. What's your name? Jero.
Jeroen.
Jeroen,
Jeroen. And where are you from?
the Netherlands.
Hmm.
Oh, of course. It's pronounced just exactly the way it's spelled.
Yeah.
And sometimes you put up a phonetic spelling, which is really helpful.
Oh, I'll do that next time.
Yes, you've done that in the past because
Yeah.
I look at it and I think, now what was it he put up last time? I can't remember. I blame it on getting old, but it's probably not true.
It's the Dutch. It's the Dutch.
Yeah, it's horrible. I know.
And every time I've said that to people that are Dutch, they said, "Oh, it's spelled just like it sounds just like it's spelled."
Right.
Something like this. Jeroen.
Jeroen.
You're by Amsterdam, right? You're near Amsterdam?
In fact, earlier you said, Jeroen, you said, it's a Dutch poet. And I said, oh, there are Dutch poets?
Yeah, many.
I don't mean to be mean. I'm just
No.
being ignorant.
Look, the Dutch are some of the most aren't the most successful society currently, living the longest, being the tallest. We should give.
They are
drowning
famous
the
as well.
And we're drowning the first with global warming.
Right, and we're drowning the first.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there were Dutch poems before there were American ones.
Yeah.
Most likely, yes. I
Yes.
would imagine there was.
Well, I mean, and look, American poetry doesn't really start until Emily Dickinson in the middle of the 1800s. The country's 100 years old before they actually have the wherewithal to have actual poets that try something on the cutting edge. You know, Hiawatha and all that is real, you know, just right in the classic tradition. Nothing experimental to it.
Ralph Waldo financed most of those early writers, so that was Emerson was.
Thomas Taylor.
Yeah.
He's quite old.
Thomas Taylor. Okay.
Before Emily Dickinson comes on the scene.
Is he experimental?
Michael Wigglesworth. The Day of Doom.
These are all sort of in the romantic tradition, right?
Puritan.
Yeah, and you're going all the way back to the Puritans, right?
Yeah, and that's basically British literature. Then it's not really American. You know, for the American, you know, to have a spirit of its own place. Yeah, I think it took a while, which is an interesting thing. To happen with painting as well. You know, it was just traditional painting, while the French are doing Impressionism and all this. Americans are still painting, you know, portraits and representational stuff.
Or they're going to Paris.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's other-
Well, and still painting, Mary Cassatt is still painting children and mothers,
Right.
very traditional.
I think Dutch poetry was there before, even before New York was New Amsterdam.
that also seems quite likely.
And Lee, where are you from?
I'm also from the Netherlands.
Ah,
Netherlands, okay.
see, just exactly like it's spelled, L-E-E.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's just-
Lee.
Yes.
Mm.
But Dutch people call me Lay.
Yes, not,
Just as it's spelled.
Can't
Well,
help it.
my wife's family is from Friesland, which is
Yeah, you told me before. Yeah,
where in the Netherlands are you?
I'm in Zaandam.
Oh, okay.
How
I'm in
about you?
Almere.
Where?
Almere.
Oh, Almere. Oh, nice.
We're at the two opposite parts of Amsterdam. I mean,
Yes,
Oh,
we're
okay.
divided by Amsterdam.
yeah.
And Mark, you're from where?
From Germany.
Are you living there now?
Hmm.
Where in Germany?
It's the western part, close to Trier, that's near Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a different country.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. I've
we're
actually
quite
been,
close to that.
I've been to Trier. I walked
Oh.
across the bridge from Luxembourg to Trier.
Mhm.
We were working on a sculpture in Beaufort, Luxembourg. They have a sculpture park. And I didn't have to work that day, so I walked across with an Italian woman who I would say, "Oh my gosh, this is great." She goes, "Oh, it's French there. I speak French because I can't understand you when you speak English." But she's Italian. So
Do you know French, Terry?
yeah, I can speak French, okay, but I can't speak Italian at all. So it was Francese, Terry. And we were walking to Germany. It was fun. So Trier is in a lot of poems.
A lot of poems, really.
Yeah, a lot of poems reference Trier. From the First World War, those poets, the British war poets. I think it must have a nice sound for our English speaking ear.
Sounds like it was a front.
Yeah, it's fun. But it doesn't sound like Verdun, which is French. But
Belgium.
I remember Christopher Marlowe and his Dr. Faustus, where you also have a reference to Trier.
Okay.
yeah, we must like the sound of it.
Or the wine.
Speaking of the sound, I'm getting the smells of breakfast, so I'm.
You go enjoy it.
Yeah.
Stanley.
And
Yeah, thank
enjoy Diwali, DJ.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Stanley. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks everyone for tuning
Yeah.
in again. Really
Yeah.
great to see you all. And we'll do this again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I'll send the usual sorts of email announcements, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. I think it's
It was a great discussion. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And I think we have the right poems for next time. It could be Ashbury
that would be good. The Ashbury looks
and
quite fun.
Moore.
Marianne Moore.
Yeah,
Ashbury and Marianne Moore.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Cultural
I think that's
Poesis
really
is her
fun.
name.
yeah, yeah.
And
Cool.
I put the name of a book, Underland by Robert McFarlane, and somehow it just Underland, he goes all over the world. He writes like a poet. He's a good storyteller. It's just a fascinating book, and I'm sure he mentions tarantula somewhere. But there's this whole sub area under Paris that he talks about, all of the places that are under the land. I think it should go with all of the tree poems that we looked at. There's so many things that related today that I just put in
Cool.
to see
I'm looking it up now. Yeah, yeah. I'll have to check this out. Underland.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm off.
Yeah,
Oops.
Cool.
okay, bye.
Hello, everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy the rest of
Bye.
your weekends
Bye-bye.
and the rest of your
Yeah,
Saturday.
you too,
Good luck.
Max.